And now for my next number, I'd like to return to the classics.
And we're live. Now, first things first, you recently attended BLFC, is that correct?
Yes, I did.
How did that go?
It was okay. Because my attendance was rather last minute, I wasn't able to secure either art show or dealer's room space, but I still showed up and, made the most of it.
How has the con experience been for you during the past couple of years?
Well, I really haven't been doing much in the way of cons since about 2005. I have only done about very few conventions.
Have you been selling much?
Well, since then, not really. No, I've been relatively inactive, doing some other odds and ends. But other than throwing a little bit of content on things like Fur Affinity and such, no, haven't been hitting cons. Haven't been out and about much at all.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah.
I have noticed some sculpture work in your gallery.
Yeah. Well, actually, if it's the three figures, Erma, Toki, and Dia, those are actually done by Joseph Llewellyn, who did them purely on spec and ran up a limited run of cast resin copies.
I see. So those were done by other people.
Oh, those particular ones, yes.
All right. And what about your Argent Small Arms line?
Well, that's languished. Beyond the initial effort to, one, work up a reasonable casting technique, then actually test firing a bunch of them to see how well they do in fact work. I'm not much of a salesman, and at that point I wasn't doing too many cons, and there's not a lot of obvious convention sales for silver bullets at a furry con type of thing. So that's sort of largely languished. I can still do them, probably do stuff on request even now, but I haven't pushed that in years.
Right. It would be hard to get that airport security.
No, that's not a problem at all. Especially as check luggage, no, that's not an issue.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Now, guess we could start at not the very beginning, but fairly early on. Could you tell us a bit about your military?
Well, it's unremarkable for the most part. I did a delayed enlistment while I was still in high school in April of '74, then went active and on to basic training in August. Initially, due to the various aptitude tests, I thought I'd be a linguist or translator or what have you. And so I went to the Presidio of Monterey to study at the Defense Language Institute there. But I didn't do very well, partially because I wasn't the greatest student, but also, unfortunately, I was being tagged to work for North Vietnamese, and I had if I was going to read it, I would probably do perfectly fine, but I had to listen to it, and I had absolutely no ear for the tonal vowel effects that the Vietnamese languages have.
Aha.
So I washed out of there. Then, by stupid luck, I wanted to become a graphics specialist when I joined, but the Air Force put you where they think they need you.
Right.
But at that point, having washed out of language school, they had some slots open in graphics, and so I became a graphics specialist. So that's what I did. Ended up doing for 6 years in service.
All right. Did you have any type of technical training for your art?
Oh gosh, no. It was all. I was strongly encouraged by my mother, who was sort of a frustrated fine artist herself, and then the rest of it was just my own interest in practice. Then, as a graphics specialist, other than a single manual of stuff you're supposed to be able to do, everything else was just either stuff I already knew or sort of on-the-job training and experience.
What are the basics they required you to know?
Well, an awful lot. A lot of it was just simple Well, it sort of depends on what kind of a shop I went to. A graphics specialist in the Air Force was sort of a catch-all for almost any kind of written or audiovisual training aids, briefing material, publications, even TV. In theory, at least TV production work, and any kind of training or presentational material of any kind. At least in theory. In my experience, I ended up doing mostly paste up and layout for briefing displays, and then later on did paste up and layout for magazine publication. But in theory, I could have gone to a shop that did television work, or to an engineering thing, and I'd be doing drafting. In fact, one of the guys I worked with at one point, he had just come from an electrical engineering squadron, and all he did all day long was correct wiring diagrams, but that fell within the range of what a graphics specialist might do, so.
All right. Now, weren't you abroad in Germany for a while?
Yes, my last 3 years were in Germany, which is where I started getting involved with attempting to doing cartooning, and eventually the genesis of Albedo came about.
That started in Germany.
Yeah, after a fashion. What had happened was that I was mail ordering a lot of underground and first generation independent press comics and such. So I was exposed to that kind of thing of small press, limited press, self-published kind of activity going on. And at the same time, I had to do some briefings that, to jazz them up, wanted some little cartoon illustrations to sort of punch it up, to make it more visually interesting. And I found that, hey, I did those cartoons. I like doing cartoons. I could do my own cartoons. And that's where I sort of fell down that rabbit hole of doing, cartoon and, basically cartoon graphic storytelling, graphic illustration type stuff.
Right. Do you recall any of the names of these small-time zines?
Oh, gosh. If you could ever find a Krupp catalog from around 1976, 77, and look through half of their catalog, either I was aware of or actually bought them. This whole Star Reach line of independents. Of course, I got some of the classic undergrounds, like some of Arcrum stuff, and especially funny animal stuff by Steve Lealoa and early Ken Macklin. Right off the top of my head, and sort of obliquely some Ken Fletcher and a few other most basically like furry art fans out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area. So I had a certain amount of feel for some of the sort of prototypical funny animal fandom as well.
Gotcha. And speaking of which, what was your first exposure to furry fandom?
Well, at the time there wasn't a focused or there wasn't really a critical mass of what would an actual furry fandom. There were fans that were doing furry content or were interested in furry content, but it was sort of vague and nebulous, and everyone was doing sort of their own things solely in their circle. Like, for example, like with Ken Fletcher and others in Minneapolis, St. Paul area, they were doing some little funny animal appas and things like that. Then out on the West Coast, the Cartoon Fantasy Organization, that was mostly exposing America to early anime and such like that. But there was a certain funny animal crossover in that crowd too. And then there were a lot of individuals that were doing funny animal art, but they were doing it purely themselves, largely in isolation. So sort of the genesis of the fandom as a overarching fandom could probably use Worldcon 1980 in Boston, where a bunch of these individual fans managed to get together at the same place at the same time, and it sort of gelled from that. All of a sudden, we had all this interest in common, and it sort of became a more cohesive thing that we all had in common and could communicate with each other and sort of explode out from there. Because heretofore it was simply, oh, I happen to like funny animal stuff. Oh, so do you. But that was about as far as it went, if that makes any sense at all, of course.
Yeah, I gotcha. I've been reading up a lot about the history recently. Now, have you met a lot of other military furries?
A few, I guess, especially back in the day when I was going to conventions. Keeping in mind that for a while in the mid '80s and early '90s, I was going up to a dozen or more cons a year, mostly all up and down the West Coast. So I was running into all kinds of people, and some of them had military background and such. And as an aside, I'm currently indulging in some Zootopia fan fiction writing.
Interesting.
And some of the better writers in that genre are ex-military, and some of them are rather middle-aged to older guys, but they also write some remarkably good stuff, both in the practical quality of writing, but also writing with depth and heart, and really excellent, mature writing and character development and all that stuff. So it's an interesting contrast, because some of the younger fans writing like this fanfic, they tend to be kind of, the writing itself can be a little awkward, and often they just indulge in the kink of the moment type of stuff, or
right.
Whatever silly thing they want to write. Anyway, but no, not a ton of overt of, if they were military or military adjacent, that was sort of secondary, and certainly it didn't really come up in like the work content or anything like that. Or didn't see a lot. There was a couple guys that were doing furry military stuff. At least one of them was kind of disappointed that Albedo, for example, wasn't the kind of military that he really wanted to have, which was a bit more, not necessarily Naziistic, but a more unpleasantly militaristic slant. And I was going, no, I don't really think I want to do that. Anyway, but that's an aside.
All right. Yeah, a user named Highwing told me that you're a big Zootopia fan, so that's not a big surprise.
Yeah.
And being in the military, I suppose, would imbue you with world experience, because you've traveled the world and all that.
Yeah, yes, there's a certain amount. And especially having not just like military technology and tactics, but the broader issues of, as became an almost stereotypical phrase that showed up in the comics a lot, socio-political ramifications, because the military doesn't exist in a vacuum compared to politics and social issues and all that sort of stuff. And so I was always aware of that as well.
Yeah, harsh reality.
Mm-hmm.
Have you read or watched Beastars?
I have to admit, I got a copy of it, but I don't even know if I have a machine that'll play it, but I'll have to ask my brother and nephew, because they're more up on current disc formats and stuff like that. I've seen little snippets of it, but I haven't actually watched it yet.
And you are old school, but yeah, very similar themes to Utopia, although they were written around the same time, coincidentally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Like I said, I just haven't. Like I said, there's a matter of formats and stuff. A little irony in that is that since one of my favorite genre is science fiction, and I've written all kinds of stuff, science fiction-y, but it's always been conceptual. But me myself, not exactly a Luddite, but very like I only got a smartphone this last year finally.
Wow.
For example, and that was only because I was finding that for increasingly for almost any kind of business, not only did I have to be online, but I also separately had to have a smartphone. to take care of business. Like, for example, if I have to deal with either the IRS or Social Security, I also have to have a smartphone.
Right.
Anyway.
But you're also much harder to track without a smartphone.
Yeah, there is that. But it's hard. That's the least of my worries at the moment. But just in general, yeah, I hate to call it newfangled computer stuff because I started getting into Macs and stuff somewhat early-ish on, but a very simple, basic use. Internet access, some basic Photoshop work, some very basic text work, and everything else was sort of didn't need it. And at times didn't want it because there's a lot of bloatware. So, yes, I actually need gigabyte of space for all this other stuff that comes with the systems, whether you want them or not.
Right. That's the other side of the coin with technology. Sometimes it actually makes stuff worse.
Yeah.
And there are updates that you don't ask for, and sometimes you can't even opt out of them.
Yeah, I discovered that with... I had a real nice Epson printer that I made the mistake of allowing it to be connected to my computer that's actually connected to the internet.
Oh, no.
And so it automatically got updated. And as originally configured, I could use refilled cartridges or aftermarket cartridges or off-brand cartridges, and it would accept all that perfectly fine.
Can't have that.
So after the update, it will only take fresh cartridges, fresh Epson, proprietary cartridges. And even if I made the mistake of pulling a cartridge out and putting it back in, it was no longer a fresh cartridge. Anyway,
Gotta love technology.
Yeah, there's also the problem of what do you own versus what are you only buying or leasing or, only renting or leasing. For example, I had a bunch of, for my iPod, I went through the Apple Store to get some uploads and such like that, and they were done on an older credit card. And when that credit card expired, my access to all that stuff that I had previously downloaded also expired. Yeah.
Imagine that.
Yeah. Anyway, but wandering far afield though at the moment, so I guess we should be talking about the exciting world of furry and funny animals and associated genre-specific stuff.
Oh, no, that's fine. We'll talk about wherever the conversation leads.
Alrighty, that's fine too.
See, that's why I think people are starting to buy up physical media again. 1 week, your favorite music will be on Spotify, and then next, it's all gone.
Yeah, there's that as well. Yeah, so whenever I can, I usually, I actually buy, at least a disc copy. And I still have a fair collection of old vinyl, too, of course.
Yeah. The scratchy warmth.
Yeah. Anyway. So needless to say, the highly connected, now world and I are not well connected. When I was trying to, for example, the most recent example, when I was trying to arrange situations with biggest little FurCon, I was having problems communicating with them. Their website was at least trying to connect with them through their website email apparently wasn't working quite right. And then I asked around about, hey, is there any other way to get a hold of them? And everyone said, oh, you could do this and that and whatever. And a couple of them I didn't do, and a couple other communication systems they mentioned I hadn't even heard of, so I was sort of SOL'd on that. But,
You could always try smoke signals, semaphore.
Yeah. Anyway, but, again, that's just and what little stuff I do, I just basically basic email, basic, when it works, because I'm going through Comcast, and I won't get into customer service problems there. Anyway, other than that, other than Facebook, then Fur Affinity and AO3 and stuff like that, I don't really have much of a presence online in any form. Oh, I also got some stuff on DeviantArt, but it's sort of a small best of posting of some material.
Well, whatever works for you.
Yeah.
But on the other side of technology, has it improved your work process? Like, do you use things like Photoshop?
Yeah, but only for only for like very basic editing, for scanning something in and changing the size, or cleaning up, or doing a little cleanup of black and white line work, and also inserting text, which I'm still sort of kind of only learning how to do properly. I do have a Wacom tablet, and it's really keen and neat and exciting, but I'm still having a hard time adjusting to it because I'm so more used to the I've got a half a century of tactile and motor experience working directly, on direct physical media, and trying to do things other than direct physical media I'm finding it difficult to make the transition.
Yeah, it's hard to find motor memory.
Yeah, but I am sort of slowly rewarming myself up to try and work up new content finally after being in the doldrums for so long. So who knows? Maybe I'll get my butt in gear and get some really serious new content out. It would probably be like in the farm. It would probably be online initially. Like if I was doing any more Albedo work, it would be initially purely online rather than a hard copy publication. Especially since hard copy publications especially standard comic book format, is all not exactly dead, but just short of it anymore.
Pretty much.
Yeah, and especially for a short run self pub type of thing. So yeah, there's that. So I by if nothing else, I will sort of, if I get back into doing more stuff, I will pretty much be forced into learning some new techie techniques just out of necessity, because some of the old techniques would require a resource that frankly doesn't exist anymore, or at least isn't as prevalent, isn't as convenient.
Some of the old tech, like what now?
Press type, various type, basically press type lettering, various self-adhesive shading sheets. You can sort of fudge that nowadays, but it ain't the same, and certainly isn't as convenient as it was back in the day. Though there are some new, if you want to do it with Photoshop, there are ways that'll do the same job. But again, I'm still used to the purely hands-on version of doing things, and having to either mouse or stylus on effects or something like that is still something I'm slow to learn.
Fair enough. Now we'll go way back in time again. Do you remember a little fanzine named Huzzah?
Oh yeah. Yep. Recently, one of the co-authors and I have been dredging up the few copies we have left and making them available to some collectors. But yes. So that has been recently refreshed. At least my memory of it has been refreshed. Sorry.
And do you remember collaborating on that?
Oh gosh, yes. There was at least 4 of us involved. Myself, Jeff Kelly, and I think Ben Berggraf was the other actual artist. Then there was a 4th gentleman who I have to apologize. I don't recall the name at the moment, but there was a 4th. That was the thing. We just sort of cobbled it together haphazardly. That had confusion and such regarding page format and such, as far as getting it physically printed. So it was a learning experience for all of us involved. But yeah, it was a thing.
Yep. Kevin Carroll and John Warner.
Yeah, that's those names sound familiar. Yes. Okay. So yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Yeah.
And and that was the prototype for Erma Felna EDF.
Yes, indeed. That was the very rough first version thereof. Yeah, yeah. Especially at the time, I was still really just barely initially developing my cartooning style at all. This was all, from my first little briefing cartoon sketches to Huzzah was like less than a year, or maybe barely a year. And even the Albedo, the prototype issue back in '83. Again, that's only a few years on, and I was still sort of warming up to being able to do semi-consistent cartoony art.
Right, and Albedo Zero contains a story called Bad Rubber, right?
Yes, it is.
Parody of Blade Run.
Yes, yes. I have to admit I can't claim sole credit for that. What was happening is several of us got together, a bunch of fanish friends, in science fiction and media fan friends. Anyway, we'd gone to see Blade Runner, and afterwards, one of them, Jim and June Hill, they mentioned. I think one of them or both of them mentioned, "Hey, why don't you do, because they knew I was doodling and cartooning and stuff like that, and tossed up the notion of Rick Duckert, Bad Rubber," and I said, "Yeah." And so that was the start for that. And so that was a real fun one shot again. And again, as a prototype notion, it was again figuring out formats and printing requirements and how to get the job done as much as actually telling the story and such. And I got really lucky in that a fellow I know who worked as a printer had spare press time and was willing to donate his time and resource to run up the first copy batches of Albedo Zero.
Now, where did you come up with the name?
It's the practical. It's from the astronomical. Usually, you refer to as astronomical reference of an index of reflection. Because I'm being very artistic and clever, that the stories, like the core stories ideas, would have socio-political stuff that would sort of, after a fashion, touch on, after a fashion, reflect some real world social and political issues. I was keeping in mind when I was first working on this, I was stationed in Germany. I made myself very aware of international events because I was in Germany at toward the tail end of the Cold War, and so keeping up on what's going on in the world I found to be very important. And in fact, as an example of late Cold War jitters, one night coming back, I was out in the town, so to speak, and I was walking back towards the barracks, and a meteor arced over from east to west and dropped down below the horizon. It was a fairly persistent one, so it actually, because it usually goes just a quick flip, but this actually trailed for a while. It actually dropped below the local horizon, and I stopped and waited for the flash because a Soviet reentry vehicle would look just like that. That was the time and place I was in at the time. So the notion of being highly aware of all the interesting factors that went into international fun and games was a real thing.
Wow.
Yeah.
What a time.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine.
Yeah. But that's the way it was. Being stationed in Germany, we had to do various exercises in case of attack or having to do. There's a really cheerful bit of little trivia for since my base also had a very large civilian and family dependents of the active service members there. They had a lot of civilians on base, and so they had to work up ways to practically evacuate large numbers of family and children and all that stuff. And unfortunately, that also had some of the security police. They didn't do it this is just a practice drill, so obviously nothing happened. But they had to iron out the procedures to take care of pets that they couldn't take with them because they weren't going to leave them there alive and abandoned. So that was one of the cold calculations of the time as well.
I see. Now, can you tell us about Thoughts and Images, the publisher?
That's me. That was literally me doing business as. Most of the early issues of Albedo, I did all the paste up, layout, all the camera ready work, then handed it off to the printer, and he handed me back the finished copies, and I handled sales and distribution. And I'll never do that again because being a publisher, even a publisher of a small press comic, to do it and do it really well and successful, that has to be pretty much your full-time job. And trying to do that and still be a content creator, that didn't work very well. I'm the first to admit that I sort of fumbled through, and it lasted as long as it did, even with my fumbling and such. Though the last couple of issues were actually handed off to another gentleman, and he sort of tried to take care of it for just a little while, but that's sort of all. It didn't last very long, but we did at least give it a shot. But initially, Thoughts and Images was just me out of Seattle.
All right. Do you still own all the rights to Albedo and Erma Felna?
Oh, yeah, to that, yes. All the other content that was in the comics, that reverted back to their creators. And in fact, that was one of the things that was slightly frustrating for me in that, one, because I'm lazy, and two, because I always wanted it to be an anthology comic. I want to have my story going, but I wanted to publish other people's content for show and let them get out there and stuff. But at the same time, since the comic, especially later on, was barely breaking even, it was hard to say, hey, can you do a story for me? But I can't really pay you very much or anything. It's a couple of times. So that was that. But it did chug on for, I did a total of 14 issues of Albedo plus 3 issues of The Desert Peach and 1 issue of Zell Sword Dancer as Thoughts and Images. Then Donna Barr took The Desert Peach to another publisher and has done very well with that. And then, of course, early on, I was the first person to publish Stan Sakai, and he quit. After the 3 issues of that in Albedo, he went on to a publisher who could better take care of him as far as getting copies out, timely payments, the whole business of the business. And so, of course, he's now an absolutely worldwide phenomenon, and I'm so thrilled for him because he's like the nicest. Well, he's like one of the 2 nicest guys in comic art production experience. The whole thing. He and Sergio Aragones are both just absolute sweethearts, and I've met them. I've worked with Stan, and I've met Sergio several times, and they're just absolute wonderful people. And I'm just thrilled as heck that I had the opportunity to do anything with Stan at all, because he's a phenomenon.
Oh, that's awesome. Yes, Stan mentioned you in a recent interview. Yeah, you must have worked with a lot of awesome artists during the course of your publishing. So,
a few. Oh, yeah, a few.
Yeah, how on earth did you get hold of these people back in the day?
Well, early on, I knew some of the people in the greater Los Angeles area, some of the CFO crossover crowd, and by extension, there's some cartoonists and stuff. Everyone, not everyone knows everyone, but a lot of people knew each other, and so we'd say, hey, something's going on. You want, who's doing what, who wants to do what, things like that. So getting a hold of people and doing stuff, it was very informal, but it was really easy to, hey, do you know if blah, blah, blah is available, or can I just, how can I get a hold of them? And, they're passing around that kind of information was both very routine and, in a very, very positive, low-key, casual, ongoing process. So, and I met all kinds of people. Another thing that was going on in the 80s, I mentioned before, there was a bit of early furry APA out of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, then there was another APA started in the LA area. The LA area called Rauerbrazil.
Yeah.
And they had all kinds of people contributing at various times, including some Cal Arts type folks, several of which have gone on to serious mainstream careers and things like that.
Right.
So that was another way for people to, because at the time it was just a fun little APA. People would throw, if you're familiar with an APA?
Yes, amateur press
Okay.
association.
Yeah, so everyone would throw in a little thing, someone would combine it out, then redistribute it out so everyone could see what everyone else was doing. And that was a quick and easy way to spread the word as to who was doing what and who might be available, or who just people to schmooze and things as well. So that was a wonderful time.
Yeah, I have a strange fascination with that, partially because I completely missed it. And those are absurdly expensive now.
Yeah, well, because the only people who got them were the only the people who put stuff in got stuff out again. So
Yep.
Yeah. So if anyone's letting them loose, it's because they're letting go of their own personal copies.
That would explain it.
Yeah.
Speaking of APAs, did you know that there was another APA named Huzzah that was not made by you?
Yes, that was Dwight Dutton was the one who headed that up.
Yeah. Did you have anything to do with that?
Not as much as I could have or even should have. He was seriously enthusiastic fan of my work early on, and so which is largely why he created this, because he wanted to have this kind of stuff going on. And I communicated with him and did stuff with him off and on, but truth be told, just in general, for why I only put out as few issues as I did, both as self-publishing and later on published by others, is I'm kind of lazy, and so, or at least not as focused on getting the specific work out. I'm easily distracted or sidelined by other things. So I should have been more active with Huzzah, and I think Dwight would have been absolutely delighted with that. But that and other things I sort of let slide, needlessly, simply because, like I said, I'm sort of a little bit lazy, a little bit more unfocused, and such like that. So, yeah, which is another thing I admire so much about Stan, was that he is an absolute powerhouse as far as focused, quality work day after day. He's a total, in that respect, he's a total machine, and I'm going, wow, I wish I could even be a fraction of that. Yeah, because he's done, he's been doing Usagi, pretty much nonstop for 40 years now, and and he's done other work too at the same time, lettering and some other comic book work and things like that, unrelated. So but for me, no, I kind of slacked and slid, and in fact, that's also a little bit of I feel of ongoing guilt that I didn't do better by various fans. Especially early, I'd get a lot of very enthusiastic fan mail and fanish reaction, and I said, okay, thank you very much, okay, but I wasn't as reciprocal as I could have or should have been. I'm the first to admit it. And now as an old man, I'm looking back with great regret about all the things I should have or could have done, more, better, different. But yeah, such is the history. Anyway.
Oh, well, we're only... Wait, strike that from the record.
Yeah, especially if we're talking about the furry crowd, there's an awful lot of folks that wouldn't necessarily be identifying that as their first choice. But yeah. Anyway, okay.
Do you
what else?
have a persona?
I have a caricature of myself that I use, but I wouldn't call it a persona to the extent that an awful lot of the furry fans, they get kind of intense and they're literally alter ego type things. And I'm much lower key on that. I do have a character that I use, I've actually even did a couple of silly little Zootopia fanfics with that character. But it's simple, low key nothing because people to be honest, people say, "Hey, are you a furry fan?" And I say, "No, I'm more of a content provider than a fan." I like doing the stuff, and I like seeing the stuff. But actually, to back up, I'm not a furry lifestyle fan. I'm just a guy who likes the content, and that's that level of fanish interest.
I gotcha.
Yeah, because I know people that are seriously hardcore, various kinds of hardcore in their fanish enthusiasms, and I don't begrudge them that at all. But I'm just not that intense.
No, guy called Antiquity Varmint asks, "Have you been keeping up with furry comics?" Boy, what timing!
I have to say no. No, I barely ever go to any kind of a comic shop, and most ones I go to are just mainstream superhero stuff, and so if there are hard copy comics out there, I'm simply not. I haven't been seeing them, and I've only seen very, very few web. I know there's a lot of web comics out there, and I've just missed them. But no, I'm not aware. I have to admit, I have no real awareness of the current state of furry comics, furry-related content out there.
All right. Can you tell us about the character Erma Felna?
Yes. Okay. Well, it's interestingly, she very quickly evolved from what I first started with. When I very, very first kicking around the thing, it was more the Astro Duck, which was sort of a take on Duck Dodgers in the 23rd and a half century, kind of. And so in that initial thing, there was a minor secondary character who was a not entirely flattering parody of one of my coworkers. Sort of a stiff, very officious individual. And but that didn't last hardly any length of time at all, especially once I started thinking about Albedo as it became more straight story, hard science fiction type thing. So Erma started off. Erma has always been, certainly in the beginning, she was fractionally autobiographical, because when I joined the Air Force, I was gung ho Joe. I was going to do my duty. I took my oath of enlistment very seriously, et cetera, et cetera. So I was all seriously gung ho young troop, and in that respect, so was Erma. She was very serious. She was very studious. She had but as an officer, she had an extra layer of responsibility and command authority and stuff like that. And so, but of course, I had to work up a backstory, and so her family situation was a little bit tragic, and it kind of skewed her to be an extra push towards duty and doing the right thing, and etc. And so, of course, then later on, when things around her became more murky and gray, that became a definite source of conflict, because she wanted to do the right thing for the right reason, and increasingly that wasn't really a thing available for her to do. But also when people wonder why I want to do a female character as well, they're certainly more fun than, I'm a guy, and it's easy to do guy stuff. And to do a female character had the fun of, I can draw a female character. But also, I was a bit inspired because my mother was basically, divorced young with 4 young kids, 4 young sons, and pretty much dragged us through and kept us going for years and years as a single mother, a single divorced mother, and she was always trying to encourage us for education. We all became, to greater or lesser extent, bibliophiles. She loved books, and in me, and all of us to an extent, and me specifically more directly, emphasized us to, push our artistic potential and such like that. Arguably, I don't have a lot of potential, but I do have a lot of practice, so I was able to, make the most of what I could do that way. But and that's also why I have some other interesting female characters, because it's easy to make, easy to come up with male military grunts, but but instead have a nuanced female character is more of a creative interest / challenge, and I wanted to do it right.
That's a fair point. And it sounds a bit like she evolved along with you.
Mm-hmm.
And I have also heard that there is an RPG based on the world of Albedo or Erma Felna.
Oh, there's several, actually.
Really?
Yeah, the first one was written primarily by Paul Kidd back in the late 80s. There were 2 editions. The first one was a sort of a deluxe boxed edition. The second edition was a bit more streamlined and came out as a single published book. That was published by me, in fact. That was a self-published, but Paul Kidd and I believe Craig Hilton and a few others in Australia, they wrote it all up. Then a bit later, another games publisher approached me, and they basically did a licensed Albedo-based RPG. But that was mostly them doing their thing, but with Albedo designs and characters and stuff like that. And again, that was a project that I kind of dropped the ball on. I could have put more focus on it and done more content for them, and so they had to semi-punt it themselves to mixed results. But I've told that the game isn't bad. Then more recently, just a couple of years back, another outfit out of England had did a tabletop game for Albedo in the small tabletop gaming scale set. Sets of figures, sets of equipment, and such like that, which apparently is done okay. And unfortunately, again, I didn't do it. I could have contributed more to their content and didn't, but they did okay with it. And it's an interesting spin-off with the funny animal angle. They, along with the regular figures with troops and uniforms and clothes and stuff like that, they had both interchangeable heads for the different animal species. Then, by extension, they made interchangeable, just random animal heads that you could apply to other tabletop game figures. So you could, like, if you had a medieval setting, you can switch all your druids and sorcerers and whatever into funny animal versions of themselves and things like that, which is an interesting little spin-off that they did.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah. And even for a short time, I was approached by a film producer out of one of the guys out of Japan, but they had, we just had some initial, "Oh, you're interested? I'm interested," kind of talk. It was right before there was a big economic slump, especially in Japan, and so that sort of put a big hold on some ambitious production potential and stuff like that. So that sort of quickly came to an end. But that was at least kind of a cool thought.
Absolutely. Now, did you ever get paid?
Paid?
Yeah.
For?
Your intellectual property, of course.
Well, the film related, that was just this very initial thing. So there was nothing really happened there. For the various games, no real money. The thing I self-published, that ended up sort of, kind of, almost breaking even by the time all the screaming was done. The other things done by the other publishers, I basically said, I wasn't greedy, and two, I knew they were not going to make great sacks of money. So at that point, I said, hey, if you can send me some merchandise so I can have some either to sell and for my file copies, that would be fine. And that's about the way it worked. Again, this is sort of a niche. It was sort of a niche product lines, and so no one was making enough money to really worry about that sort of stuff.
You're too kind.
Yeah. Well, that was all. It's also the unfortunate reality of the things. Like, for example, with comics nowadays, if I tried to publish Albedo now, I don't think I could even break even. I'd be hard pressed to break even on it if it was done as a standard format comic. I don't think it'd ever make any kind of sales, and it's not out of a lack of generally. I think there's certain body of fans that would be, ooh, cool, this is great. But at the same time, market sensibilities have been so skewed by the notion of collecting and collectability. Because, as an example, quite often someone, entirely new to it will say, ooh, this looks really neat. And, well, I think I should buy some. And the next question that comes up, is it going to be worth something?
Right.
Especially with the big black and white boom and bust back in the day, that really did put a major clobber on comics in general. With comic speculators and just the notion of, why should I spend $5 on a comic that's only 32 pages, blah, 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 and it isn't going to be worth $1,000 next year. So why should I bother buying it type of mindset? Frustrating, but unfortunately that's a big reality of the market anymore. Yeah. And by extension, there's whole big blocks of the fandom that simply don't buy hard copy. I went to one convention, and most of the crowd there they were almost solely, if it wasn't online for free, they weren't interested. They simply, I'm not going to spend money on a hard copy comic. Especially, and at this point in time, Albedo had been languishing for a couple years, and so this isn't even the newest comic. And what? You want me to spend money on a hard copy? No. If it ain't online in some form or another, I'm completely disinterested. That was unfortunately that especially at that particular convention, that was pretty much the prevailing attitude. Is if it isn't online and it isn't fresh this week, they had no interest in it. There's a whole block of the fandom that is completely disinterested in the history of the fandom, early content and things like that. They only want is the new, the now, and preferably the online for free.
Ugh. Folly of youth.
Yeah, and it isn't even necessarily youth. It's it's just a lot of people are frankly, especially, and again, there's some of it boils back to the various collector speculator mindset as well. But it's a frustrating reality all too often in the market anymore.
Depressing.
Yeah.
Well, user Not Ordinary in Games had a question. Sounds like I already know the answer, but he wanted to know if Erma Felna or Birthright will ever be reprinted.
Okay. A couple things with that. At stevegallacci.com, all lowercase, all one word kind of thing, archives all of the Erma content from all of the published issues, and that's if you want to catch up on the whole Erma story arc, that's where you can find it. And with each issue's worth of content, there's a little blurb that also explains what else was in it, who else was in it, and little fussy details and stuff. Also, a reproduction of the cover, so you can see what it looked like. So there is that. I've been waffling on doing some kind of collected reprint. For Birthright, the first story arc of Birthright is also online over at Radio Comics, and I owe them the second story arc, which I will probably finally get over to them sooner rather than later. So that whole big story arc will become available online to view. The third story arc, if that never sees the light of day again, I wouldn't mind. That was kind of a half-assed mess. And if I were to do anything with it, it would be a complete redo, substantially rewritten, of course, all new art, etc. But yeah, that was in the height of me being lazy and somewhat stupid. So that's kind of an embarrassment. And like I said, if that never sees the light of day, probably would be better for all concerned.
No, each of these Birthright story arcs, were they in a separate issue of Critters?
Okay, the first two story arcs were simply part of, because the Critters at that point was an anthology saying there'd be 2 or 3 stories per issue, and there'd be an installment of Birthright in them. So the first story arc is in the first 6 issues. The second story arc is like issues, I want to say 12 through 18, but don't hold me to that. But I think that's approximately correct. The last story arc ended up being the last 3 issues of Critters as a full standalones. Issues 47 through 50 were it was Critters, but it was an all Birthright content.
All right. Well, that's exciting news. Good to hear.
Yeah, so at least that content is at least viewable. I am debating about doing a massive collected reprint of all the Erma content in a single volume. I'm also, again, and that might be in conjunction with doing some new content. As a little backup explanation of what happened that Albedo stopped is that in the spring of 2005, I started doing Albedo again with Shanda Fantasy Arts, Mike Curtis and his crew, and so the first 2 issues came out. Yeah, okay. I was busily working on what would have been my content for the 3rd issue, and about that time, my wife was diagnosed with stage 3 ovarian cancer, and that so all of my focus went on to taking care of her and worrying about that. And so all my artwork stopped, all my convention work stopped, and so that's what happened. And so that that stopped it in the 2 years that it took for the cancer to kill her. And afterwards, I was not really up to thinking about doing much new content of any type other than some occasional spot art and things like that. But doing continuing Albedo at that point was the last thing on my mind.
Right.
I did do a separate story in sort of a sketch form around 2000, I think starting 2013, from an idea that had been kicking around since the early 80s, entitled Alone Together. It was sort of my spin on the old Lee Marvin, Toshiro Mifune movie, Hell in the Pacific, and later the science fiction version of that called Enemy Mine.
Oh, yeah.
Basically, 2 individuals, two sides of a warring nation stuck together in an isolated location and having to learn to cope with each other type of thing.
Right.
And so that was my version of that. And so I did like 60-odd pages, mostly in sketches. Some of the pages are actually inked. Some of them are even colored. And but a lot of them were just sketched out and roughly scripted. And that whole run I posted on Fur Affinity if anyone wanted to track that down.
Ooh.
I'm still thinking about doing a formal finished version of that because I thought the story was pretty good, especially if I rewrite it and get rid of a couple of jump the shark scenes and stuff like that. But that's just then. Also, on a similar vein, I also did a bunch of pages of a fan story based on Aaron Netherly's webcomic End Town. I don't know if you're familiar with it.
Only vaguely.
Yeah, sort of a very peculiar post-apocalyptic thing in which part of it involved people being morphed into funny animals. And interesting in this case, they were somewhat cartoonish funny animals, but it's weird and wacky and stuff like that. But anyway, I did my own sort of Spanish spin on this scenario, and and of course, being me, I did more of a hard science fiction interpretation of it, and I did a bunch of pages of at least rough sketches and stuff like that, and had fun with that for a good little while. Again, that's all. Most of that's posted on Fur Affinity too, if anyone wanted to track it down. But that was just a fanish indulgence.
All right. Sounds like I've got stuff to check out on your FA page.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I got a ton of content there. And if anyone was curious, I have a sack load, probably at least 250,000 words worth of fan fiction on AO3 for Zootopia. It's all Zootopia content, but a lot of story in there.
On where?
The fan fiction site AO3.
Okay. Have you heard of the webcomic called Jack?
Roz Gibson? No, I've known Roz since the very early days back with Rob Russell and stuff back in the early 80s.
Yeah, talked with her husband briefly. Had a nice long talk with her last time.
Oh yeah. She's been in the thick of it since just about day one.
Sounds like a very interesting person.
Yeah.
All right. So, what was it like working on Donna Barr's Desert Peach?
That was, in one respect, it was really easy. She was living out, I think at the time, living in Bremerton, and she would just send me the pages ready to go, and I'd set it up and get it published. That was that. It was a lot of fun, her doing the Desert Peach was just an absolute hoot, especially since several of the secondary characters were actually fan friends of hers, or mutual friends of mine and hers and such. And even a version of me appeared in the story. Yeah, if you catch some of the issues, if you find into a Zeichner von Drakenberg, their Feisler Storch pilot, that's basically me. That was just silly fun. Also, for a while, Donna at conventions was doing a version of silly Desert Peach skits, and one was sort of a quasi Wizard of Oz type of thing. I don't remember much of the details, other than I got to play the captain of the Flying Monkeys. So imagine me in a gaudy Hawaiian shirt, Luftwaffe officer's cap, and cardboard wings that look like Feisler Storch wings. And I was the captain of the Flying Monkeys in one of these convention skits. Very silly.
Are you being drawn with a mustache at the time?
Oh yeah. Always got the mustache. And though later Donna did actually have a short-lived musical that actually played in a local theater, basically a musical of the Desert Peach, which was very silly. It got reasonable sort of this is kind of silly reviews as legitimate theater. Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah. Most recently, she's doing some odds and ends webcomic stuff. She lives up in Klallam Bay, out on the Olympic Peninsula, out in the not quite the middle of nowhere, but certainly far away from the slings and arrows of urban life.
How poetic. All right. Now, what about Tales of the Finnick?
Oh gosh, yes, yes, yes. I'm just an absolute gushy fan of that. When I first saw that, I just went, "Ah, this is so cool!" And I immediately started doing my own fetish interpretations of the designs of the characters, and started writing a pile of silly fanfic and stuff, and ended up illustrating one of the episodes of it for Ellen Winkler. Now Ellen Winkler Suarez. Anyway, yeah, that's I'd love to be involved with that some more. Unfortunately, Ellen herself, she's sort of buried in taking care of mundane real life, taking care of business type of things. Being a very small press publisher, there's practically no net money in it. So she has to, it's like, I think she has a regular 9 to 5 to pay the bills. And she does, does the publishing as she can, unfortunately. So the title has been languishing for years, but if given half a chance, I'd love to, in fact, that would probably be that even more than more Albedo would be the thing to motivate me to really gen out a bunch of new content, because I really love this. Really loved it.
I can tell you're excited about that.
Oh yeah, it was just a lot of fun. Saw a lot of potential in it.
And what about Zell Sword Dancer?
Yes, that was that was a thing, sort of a sword and sorcery kind of a scenario. Yet again, I was a bit, too unfocused, lazy, whatever. I wanted to write it and lay it out, but I needed other people to physically get finished work done, and so I kind of farmed out the first issue and was considering farming out the second issue, and that really didn't come to anything. I still have all the notes for it. I think it's a potentially viable story, but it requires someone to give it the full-time attention it needs to actually go anywhere. And with everything else I'm doing or not doing, I don't see that going anywhere, I'm afraid.
Fair enough. Spontoon Island.
Oh yes, that's a real fun Fanish thing, and I had a couple of little Fanish. They got one little Fanish content I put in there, a short with again a funny animal version of Zachner von Drachenberg, back when he was in the German airship service, operating under Dr. Eichner and things like the original Graf Zeppelin and stuff like that. I had a couple of other story potentials, but they haven't really gone anywhere, and I'm not sure where any of the Fanish activity regarding Spontoons even is nowadays. I think there's still a website up and such, but I'm not aware of much in the way of any new content or activity, which is a shame, because it was a lot of fun. That was a silly Fanish thing, a funny animal, totally alternate history, even somewhat alternate Earth entirely, because it presumed a bunch of island groups in the mid-Pacific that were not here, that are not there on our Earth. And so there's all these different archipelagos and such like that. And one of them is the Spontoons. And it was initially very silly, silly fun. But people have come up with some pretty reasonable, straight stories to go with it. But it's a very much an alternate Earth. Most of the settings are in the 1920s, 1930s, and a highly alternate history. So, though there's still a certain amount of British imperial influence that's waxed and waned across the Pacific, America is very much not the America we know, and such like that. It's again a very interestingly alternate history, and even the geography is a bit alternate as well. But that was a lot of fun, and a lot of people were throwing an awful lot of silly bits into it over the years. And like I said, I had one little short bit with Zeichner. I have another story that I'd actually like to finish and follow up on, involving a crossover with, oh gosh, now I can't remember the character's name. There's an excellent cartoonist that did a couple of comics related to 1930s fascist Italy and the early and the Italian interest in high-speed seaplanes. An awful lot of the fastest racing planes in the 1920s and 30s were all seaplanes, oddly enough. And so this guy has came up with a couple of comic books worth of content involving several characters involved with the an independent creator of a couple of racing seaplanes and stuff. And one of the key characters is this little cat girl named Mia. And I think you could probably find her if you could search Mia, and I can't think of the rest of that might even be the title of the comic. It's been a while. Anyway, so he wrote these stories and stuff happened, this fur stand-loaded itself, and I did an indulgence of introducing her to Spontoons, because Spontoons, again, is sort of an alternate history, and Spontoons has the Spontoon Speed Week, and it's all racing, flying boats, and seaplanes, and it seemed a natural crossover between Spontoons and this other guy's story. And I did a little, just a little indulgent thing. But that's just me. I just, get excited and involved with stuff that piques my interest.
All right. Sounds like you've collaborated a lot over the years.
I try to, and again, it's been a lot of years. I basically became really, fan active starting in 1980. So it's, I got a lot, by this point, I've got a lot of history.
Do you enjoy working with others, or are you more of a lone wolf?
Oh, I like working with others. When it actually comes time to work, if I'm actually working, I need to focus and get the stuff done. But collaborating, for example, if I had an exciting new project, I would happily work in collab, like doing initial writing and rough pencil layouts of a comic. I can, if I have a basic story idea or a rough script, I can just bang that out in no time. And especially if and if I tighten it up, it maybe not quite as quick if I really get careful and thorough with the pencils and stuff like that. But doing that, working with someone else who can then do the finishes, because for me the finishes, doing the finished ink work and such, it's, for me personally, it's a slog. I can do it, and I can do it reasonably well, but I have to really focus, have to pay attention, and it takes a lot of hours, which is why I don't get that much done, is because, I'm either lazy or distracted, and that sort of thing.
Everybody hates that part.
Yeah, but at the same time, for actually writing and or layouts and stuff like that, I just pop it right out. I'm brimming with ideas. Unfortunately, there's a wise old engineer, Hugo Junkers, aviation designer out of Germany in the first third of the 20th century, and he pointed out, ideas are like blackberries. Everyone has them. Everyone can get them. It's actually getting finished product. That's the real work. Yeah, he pointed out that ideas are easy and easy and plentiful. It's just getting it down. But the idea part, I'm pretty much a whiz at that. I come up with all kinds of scenarios. Show me a start point, and I know, you do that and that and that and that and that and that and that. Sure.
Yep, that's true. Those seem to come so easily.
Yeah, well, it sort of depends, because I know people that they like working on the project, but they couldn't come up with an original idea if their life depended on it. And there's nothing wrong with that, because that's just not what their focus or whatever is. But yeah, that's certainly not to denigrate them otherwise.
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah.
Before I forget, is it Gallacci?
Okay, there's a story with that. I say Gallacci. Anyone else in my family you ask will get a slightly different answer, mostly in how the vowels are stressed. But that's always been the case. Gallacci, Gallisi, whatever.
Tomato.
Yeah. What's funny is that with other people, non-family, when they try and deal with the name, for example, when I was in basic training, the first roll call, the sergeant was, obviously running down alphabetical order, and when he came to mine and said my name, he hesitated, said, Garcia, which is obviously not my name at all. But I kind of figured out what he was trying to say. I say, Gallacci? Okay. And that was that. Yeah. Another time I had an interesting reaction at an automotive service center. I brought in my car to get fixed, and the guy, I had the paperwork, and he glanced at it, and he saw the first two letters, G-A something, something, something. And he dashed off and brought back a car, but it wasn't my car at all. It was I think it was like an Indian, East Indian name, like G-A-H something, 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 something. But yes, I said, well, that's not my car. And he said, oh, there's more letters and they're not the same, kind of a thing. Oh, well.
Was it a good car?
In retrospect, I probably could have done better keeping it, but that wouldn't have been nice. No. But anyway, but that's the thing. It's not a common. If I've run into a couple. In fact, there's someone else in the fandom back east who's a Gallacci, but apparently as far as I could tell, completely unrelated, or at least nothing obviously at all. Then have a lot of family and stuff up in the northwest corner of the state, around Port Angeles, Forks and stuff. A lot of the early family married out or whatever. Some of them Gallacci, some of them a bunch of other names, but there's still a whole big cluster of close and not so close relatives all over that end of the Pacific Northwest.
All right. Can you tell me about Fusion Comic?
Oh, that was a fun and interesting project, and what it started with is Lex Nakashima was an aspiring TV and or movie producer, and so he had an idea for this science fiction scenario, and started working up background stuff. Actually have the science fiction author Steve Barnes write a screenplay for it would qualify like a pilot episode or two worth of content, and he tried to shop it around. Didn't get any takers, which is also typical for every successful TV show. There's probably literally 100 show concepts that didn't get picked up, so that was no surprise. Though, of course, like a decade later, I forgot the TV version, because the movie version of the series was Serenity. Anyway, the one season TV show, I can't remember the name of the show now. Anyway, but the gist of that was it's more or less the same story. It wasn't a copy, but it was the same sort of idea that someone did produce and pick up on, and was fairly successful. And when Lex and I first saw their interpretation, I went, "Oh man, this yeah, right." Well, anyway, going back. Okay, he couldn't. couldn't get it produced, or no one was really interested at that time. But he had worked up a bunch of background. He had a script, etc. And he said, "Well, I've got this much. Hey, I could do it. Do it as a comic book." And so he approached both Layla Dowling and myself to do it. We hadn't, the two of us hadn't actually worked together, but we knew each other fairly well already. Both of us were friends with Lex, and so I was tasked with basically doing the adaptation of the screenplay. I blocked it out and worked up the story in a comic book form. Then Layla and I had this interesting tag team process to actually create it. I would do the initial rough layouts and blocking in where the characters go and stuff like that. And then I would ship off all the pages, keeping in mind these are on heavy illustration board. So an issue's worth of things was a brick of cardboard, a big heavy brick of cardboard. I would send it off to her. She would go through, maybe make some adjustments. Then she would ink in the characters that she had specifically designed and was more adept at drawing, or in this case, inking. And so she would ink in her stuff. Then she'd ship it back to me. Then I would finish the backgrounds and the inking of my characters. Then we would, I think at that point, then I would make reduced copies and do tone work. So it was a black and white comic, but it was black and white, but with gray halftones. So it had shading and such. And then as a photographic process, we would also pass this on to a letterer at Eclipse Comics. Eclipse was the actual publisher. And she would independently do all the lettering and photographically insert it into the art and all that good stuff. But that actually worked fairly well, especially later on. Our styles weren't so dissimilar that it wasn't you could if you really knew our work, you could kind of tell who did what, but it wasn't too glaringly obvious. And as it went on, it got better and better for that. And that was a hoot. There was a bunch of issues. A few of the issues were done by other artists other writers and artists as well. But I did a bunch of them. Layla and I did a bunch of them, and that was a lot of fun. That was a great project.
Sounds like it. And by the way, was that TV show Firefly?
Yes.
Awesome.
Yeah. For some reason, I keep on blanking on it. I keep on thinking of the movie, but yeah. But yes, like I said, when we first saw some of the early teasers and stuff for the TV series Firefly, going, oh man, it wasn't exactly, it was truly its own thing, but it did similar themes and a not dissimilar cast mix and such like that. And we're going, oh man, this could have been us 10 years earlier, kind of a thing.
I said, where are all the furries in Firefly?
Well, there weren't any, but that was the one change, as it was all just people's. Whereas in Fusion, about half the cast were aliens / funny animals, type things.
What a shame.
Yeah.
I'm sure most people had no idea that Firefly was based on a comic.
Oh, it wasn't based on it. It was simply a parallel evolution. No, I don't think they quite likely never saw Fusion. It's just that it was the kind of themes and things that it would be almost inevitable that someone would come up with a similar idea, but that happened to be produced rather than not produced. Yeah, because there's some ideas and stuff that at various times you'd say, oh, this guy's copying that guy and that guy's copying as well, and no, it was just it was in the wind, or whatever, or some earlier inspiration caught a bunch of other people, and they weren't copying anything in particular, but they had a general idea, then spun off from there.
I gotcha.
Yeah, that's happened more than a few times of stuff that you sort of think, oh, they're just everyone's copying everyone else, but in the moment, no, they were all just have to be thinking in the same general direction at about the same time.
Maybe it was just the zeitgeist at the time.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. Very. Very likely. Anyway, but yeah, fusion was very interesting, and just a few years ago, there's been a couple of collected reprints, so that stuff is still sort of floating around. Though I got a whole garage full of original back issues of all that sort of stuff too. Art.
Lucky.
Well, it's unfortunately, again, with the way the market is, it's almost unsellable. The occasional fan who's aware of the original or something like that might pick it up, but no, it's more general, comic, not for a lot of people. The comics format has come and gone.
Unfortunately, yeah. So, did you work on something called Beatrix?
Yes, that was my. Yeah, Tarl Wayne did a couple of issues worth of content on that, but it was originally based on my concepts, and to a certain extent, certainly in the first issue, I did a bunch of the rough work on it, script and rough work on it. Yeah, that was hoot, and the very initial part of it was, that was just me being very, very silly. But yeah, Tarl, like I said, I started it and passed it on to Tarl to do with it what he would, and he did do a couple of issues and a bit of other things with it. But that was a thing.
All right. Now, you've been in the fandom for quite a while. How has it changed over the years?
Well, there's the obvious the fursuit aspect, which is it's in fact a lot of conventions are now basically suit cons. Their primary interest is in the suits and associated creativity in that, both the creativity and the sort of the lifestyle-ish trend in that direction. So there's a lot more of that. Obviously, as before, as previously mentioned, much less of the comic format content. There are certain amount of graphic novels and more books and such like that, but old school comics are kind of gone, largely gone. It's actually one of the things that's being increased that I've been sort of delighted to see was that early on, a lot of the early artists were just fan artists doing fanish stuff. But over the years, there has been a lot of really talented artists with a big A, big fancy A artist doing content, and that's been a real thrill to see. Like if you go to Fur Affinity, there's a crap ton of really gorgeous work. Unfortunately, at the same time, since sex sells, there's an awful lot of it that's from mild erotica to kind of cringy. Oh my goodness! But to a large extent, that is unfortunately it's what people pay attention to. And so the temptation is to, in effect, pander to the market, and I can't begrudge them at all for that. But at the same time, like I said, there's some absolutely spectacular artists out there. Who knows what they would be doing if they weren't doing furry art? But that they are doing furry art I'm quite jazzed over, because, like I said, some of this stuff is really spectacular.
All right. Now, what sort of things were you drawing a lot as a kid?
Airplanes.
Why am I not surprised?
When I was a kid, it was airplanes. I was totally fascinated with it. I drew airplanes all the time. To a lesser extent, I drew ships, submarines, and airplanes. Lots and lots of airplanes. That was my great fascination as a kid. I also built models. Plastic model planes primarily. Did some flying model rocketry now and again, and things like that. And Yeah. Ironically, in my time in the Air Force, I probably drew next to no aircraft. I illustrated stuff. I made maps. I made diagrams and such like that, but next to no actual illustrations or artwork related to aircraft directly. One of the one of the ironies of my particular situation.
That's funny. Have you seen some of the interesting art? Our fandom is made of airplane, tanks, and ships and stuff.
In what particular context? I've seen some some military technology type of illustrations mixed in with other furry art and such like that. Yeah, if
Well,
that's what you mean.
where vehicles have been anthropomorphified.
Oh, I haven't really seen hardly anything like that at all.
Really?
Maybe I just missed it. Okay, but no, I've just seen more like routine Miltech. Usually a slightly science fictiony setting, occasionally historical stuff, but not actually anthropomorphized hardware. No, that I have not seen. But that's just me. I just haven't. I've missed it.
Maybe that's a good thing. All right. I've just got a few more questions, and I'll wrap this up and let you go.
Yeah, no problem.
While working, do you listen to music or podcasts or YouTube, etc.?
Oh gosh, yes. I do my best work where I've got music playing and some kind of music going on. Occasionally I might have the TV on, but that's just background noise. I don't really focus on the content. But yes, music. That helps me focus in general. I want to get a task properly done without getting distracted or something like that. I'll have music on at the same time. And yes, very much so.
All right. What do you like?
A lot of stuff. Old-timey rock and roll, classical music, some music from movie themes and things like that. All kinds of stuff. But for a large block of it, it is classic rock.
All right. I gotcha. Have you ever had any supernatural experiences?
No.
Great. And final question. Where can our listeners keep up with you these days?
When I get around to it, I'll post more stuff on Fur Affinity. Similarly, for fan fiction, it's AO3, the Zootopia subset, and I have a whole big block of content there. I'm on Facebook all the time, usually posting a lot about what I'm doing, but also making a lot of comments on various Facebook groups, especially historical aviation. No surprise there, and such like that. Yeah, in fact, if you for random trying to get a hold of me, probably the place to find me quickest, and also to get my attention the quickest, other than direct email, would be through Facebook, because I'm on there all the time.
All right. And your website, stevegallacci.com.
Well, that is just more of an archive of the Albedo content. I don't even know if I have a communication. I may have a communication function, but I'm not going back there to check to see if there's anything going on very often. So that would not be the best venue for actually trying to communicate with me.
Right. But other than that, unless you had anything else you wanted to discuss, I think that's all I had.
No, I do other things too, but they're not entirely relevant to the subject at hand. Other than I did do some funny animal versions of my Civil War reenacting,
Really?
For example. Oh yeah, I was a reenactor for like 10 years.
Had no idea about that.
Yeah. Yes, part of Company I of the 7th Regiment of Wisconsin Volunteer Infantry.
And how did that go over?
That was an interesting time. yeah, it's I love doing it. I love the living history kind of aspect of it. Uh, I was in the unit. I got up to the point where I was the unit ordnance sergeant, so I took care of a lot of the gear for the unit and such like that. Uh, but that, like everything else, went went off to the side with my wife's my wife's cancer diagnosis and such like that.
Right.
And I definitely wouldn't be picking it back up because as a realistic reenactor, ideally you'd be a very young and skinny fellow, and I am neither young nor skinny anymore. So yeah,
Oh, I see.
that doesn't make for the best impression. Yeah, the bulk of the troops tend to be lean young men.
Really?
Yeah, uh, and especially now, I just had my 69th birthday, so I'm definitely an individual of age.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah,
It's good that you brought that up because I was gonna ask about hobbies outside of the fandom. I
yeah,
just forgot to ask it for whatever
yeah,
reason.
yeah. The other thing I still build a lot of scale model stuff. Have done a certain amount of gardening and home improvement stuff. I'm also into guns, but not as like a gun fanatic. More of a collector, especially of vintage stuff. The last few years, I've been picking up on a lot of old early 19th century metallic cartridge rifles and handguns and such because they're interesting and clanky and that sort of thing. And so I dabble in that, not a lot, but a bit. So that's another thing I do.
Do you have a Sharps rifle?
Yes, I do. It's a very interesting Sharps. The receiver is an 1853 pattern. The barrel is a 40-inch, probably not Tibetan, Nepalese-made barrel, about 40 inches long. But it appears to be the barrel is almost certainly a Nepalese manufacturer, but the basic action and stuff appears to be original 1853 pattern Sharps. That would be the very early pattern with the paper cartridge with the rear shearing action, and also the little percussion flinging mechanism. I don't know if you're familiar with that on the very earliest of the Sharps.
Maybe.
Yeah, the very earliest one, instead of using regular, or in lieu of using regular percussion caps for ignition, there was a little mechanism that would toss a little primer disc into the path of, as you pulled the trigger, the hammer would start to drop, and as it started to drop, there was a little mechanism that would fling out a little disc of primer material that the hammer would trap and drive onto the nipple of the rifle, and it sort of kind of worked, but it was only used in the very earliest model of the Sharps. But anyway, but mine is of that type, interestingly. But I also have several trapdoors, and I cut a couple Martini Henrys and a couple of Snyders and some 1871-84 Mausers, and also a Kropatschek in the 8mm. This is all from the 1860s through the 1890s.
Smith carbine?
No. The earlier contraptions. I'd be tempted, but anymore, again, at this point, I'm on the cusp of not really collecting anything more, both for practical, economic reasons. Also, with all the guns I do have, I really don't shoot them very often, and otherwise they're just collecting dust in our gun safes.
Yeah,
but
ammo is so expensive.
Yeah, though in that respect, I often make my own, almost at times from scratch.
That's handy.
Yeah, I try and reload everything I shoot, And if I can't get original style brass, I can either convert. In most cases, I can just simply convert it from something else, or in a couple of cases, I've actually made the cartridges entirely from scratch. I've got a lathe. I've got a lathe that I know how to use it, kind of a thing.
I'm sorry, I'm juvenile.
Yeah, I'm also not above messing with Berdan cartridges and such as well. So yeah, I've been very versatile in reloading and cartridge making and casting bullets and all that good stuff.
Very interesting. But yeah, I suppose that's all I've got.
Okay. If you come up with anything more you want to ask or do a supplemental thing, I'd be up for that. No problems.
All right. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, sure.
And thank you for your service.
Okay, such as it was. Yeah, that was long ago and far away, and so I don't want to rest on those laurels very much anymore. I did my duty at the time, and no regrets. But again, that's more than 40 years ago, and now that's anyway.
But still.
Yeah. All righty then. Yeah, I'm good. Well, take care. Stay safe. Have fun with this content. Hope you can make good use of it.
I'm sure I will.
Okay.
All right. Yeah, you take care now.
All right. Take care. Stay safe.
You too.
Get the fuck out of here!